then.
Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
That's right, you're now a part of Aggressive Negotiations, the Star Wars podcast that explores all of the uncharted territory of the Star Wars galaxy. I am one of your hosts, Jedi Master John Mills, and joining me is my dear friend, Jedi philosopher, Jedi Master Matthew Rushing. Master Rushing, let's kick off with a little pre-question before today's topic, wherein I ask you whether Bantha burgers or Gungan fish dogs are better.
Ooh, see, this is a great question because Gungan fish dogs basically just sound like Gungan fish tacos to me. And I love fish tacos.
There you go.
And so as much as I love a good burger, I feel like the Gungan fish dogs are probably pretty amazing.
Well,
so I'm going to go with that.
There you go. That is the authoritative answer from a Jedi Master, folks, and you have to listen to it. And you have to reach out to us, and you go out by doing that and going to X, Twitter, X, Twitter 10, whatever it is now. Find us at the Jedi Masters. Find this great network that we are on at Joy Nerd Party, and look for the Nerd Party on Facebook and Instagram, whose names are eternal and unchanging as the sun in the sky. So, Jedi Master Matthew Rushing, I have an interesting question. Inspired by Tales of the Jedi, which is that delightful animated series that we got, that we will be getting a second season of, I believe.
I believe you're right.
And so I was thinking, as I went back and I rewatched some stuff, because it truly is some of the best Star Wars storytelling, period. And one of the arcs deals with Dooku and his fall. And one of the points of contention is that Mace Windu gets elevated to the Jedi Council at the end of one particular episode, and Dooku is passed over. And we can see this really does not sit well with him. We all know that Palpatine made a move for Dooku. Would Palpatine still have made a move for Dooku had he been elevated to the Council? Or would he have changed tactics and gone for Windu, who we both agree was at times skirting the line with the dark side to begin with?
I think this is a really inspired question because when I think about Dooku, and one of the things here that I think allows Palpatine to get his hooks in him is that his pride is hurt. And so with that hurt pride, he also channels that pride, I think, through his frustrations about the Republic and, the things that he's seen, that where, senators taking advantage of their entire planets. And it seems like nobody really cares about them if the Jedi weren't there. And so there's all of these mixed motivations, I feel like, for Dooku in everything. And I do think that there is a very good chance, though, that if Dooku had his pride assuaged by being on the council, that, he would have felt as though then he had the opportunity to make his voice more readily known to the council, to be able to sway maybe other members to his points of view, which would have, I think, made him feel better and would have made it, I think, more difficult for Palpatine to get his hooks in him, because I think it's the culmination of all of those frustrations that Dooku has that really allows, Palpatine to kind of sink his teeth in and pull him away from the Jedi by promising him, we're going to make the galaxy better. And the only way to really do that is the Jedi are the problem and the Sith are the answer. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you could absolutely see a way for Dooku to not go the way that he does if he's sitting on the council. Now, I guess I'm wondering, do you also think that would be the case? Like, can you see that as being a world where, Dooku feels like he's doing enough, and therefore, the promise of what Palpatine is kind of offering doesn't hold as much water for him?
No. I think, and I'm not saying that just to be a contrarian, you hit on a word that I think is key: pride. I think that Dooku's pride will never be assuaged. Never truly assuaged. And we know that Jedi Master Sifo Dyas is going to be a ranking member of the council around the same time. And we know that that little scamp got into all sorts of trouble between The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. I think that Palpatine winds up having two people that he can bend their ear. Does he go so far as to convert Dooku? No, I don't think so. But I don't think he lets go of him per se in this context. Because obviously Palpatine finds a way to influence things so that even Sifo Dyas, who so far as we know did not turn Sith, still played into his hands. I think Palpatine would have been wise enough to know how to manipulate Dooku. The flip side of that being, I honestly don't think he then goes for Windu, because while Windu is, especially in that key moment in Revenge of the Sith, just on that line, could go to darkness, I think Windu is the type that has to drive himself to darkness, because going the way of the Sith for somebody like Windu, at a minimum, is breaking the rules. And one of Windu's big things is following the rules. And so somebody coming to him and asking him to break the rules would not work. You can't break him that way. Whereas Dooku had a problem with the rules to begin with, as something he passed along to his own student Qui-Gon Jinn. And it is something that I think that's why he couldn't manage to get Windu. Now, I mean, Palpatine is a master manipulator. Maybe I'm off base, but I think that Windu is untouchable for him. But I also don't think Dooku lasts on the council. I think he cycles out pretty quick. I think he gets frustrated anyway and leaves anyway, especially if Qui-Gon winds up dying. I think no matter what, Dooku splits because he just can't take it anymore. That would be what I would offer as my answer. And long-winded, I admit, but...
Yes, long-winded. But so the thing that I was thinking is, as you were talking, because you hit on exactly the answer that I kind of had for Windu, which is that he's such a rule follower and that's his way of keeping himself in line, that I don't think that he could be sufficiently tempted to join the dark side. He's not going to be tempted by the fruit of another. And what's so interesting about that is I think that one of the things that in the beauties of the Clone Wars, and then of course what we've seen, with Tales of the Jedi, is that the Jedi themselves had become such rule followers. And it's not even until really you get Yoda going on his big journey where he has spiritual enlightenment that I think he actually truly becomes somebody who is free of the letter of the law. And it's too late by that point, because the Jedi have become such sticklers for quote unquote the law. Basically I mean that in kind of like a biblical sense, right? The law as it is written, we do not deviate, there's no grace, we just follow the letter of the law instead of the spirit of the law. And that's I think the kind of the big switch that comes, of course, through trilogies. Then you get to the original trilogy, and Luke in many ways is following the spirit of the law, right? In fact, he's actually living out the what his father it puts as he's trying to woo Padme, which is that it's about unconditional love, right? And so you would say that a Jedi is maybe encouraged to love. Well, that's true. But the problem is that the Jedi had made it such a rule about that, they had actually lost the spirit of what that meant. And so, no, I say all that to say, I think when we come to Windu, is that he is a person who just can't see any other way. And part of that is because, we do know that, Dooku was a person who, had his own struggles with the dark side. And of course, one of his ways of keeping himself on the straight and narrow was following the rules to the letter of the law. For some people, that's exactly what they need, but that doesn't mean that needs for everyone. And so, yeah, I think it creates a really interesting question. I think I'm a little bit more on the side of there's a possibility with Dooku that being on the council may have given him what he needed long enough for it to be difficult for Palpatine to really ever use him. But I think the beauty of the Clone Wars is that we see that there are other Jedi that would be willing. I mean, Pong Krell, right, is ready to jump ship. And so I think there were other Jedi out there that you could have used. The beauty of Dooku is that he had this air of regality to him, this air of trustworthiness. He was also a count, not just a Jedi, which he, really had retained, I think, that air about him throughout even his time as a Jedi. So that's one of the things that really helped in him being able to get other systems to follow him. Whereas, you have like a Pong Krell, like, is he really going to be somebody that people are going to listen to in a big meeting? Because he doesn't have any other cards to play other than, hey, I'm a turns Jedi.
Well, yeah, it's a, honestly, it's like sort of like the Darth Maul conundrum, where it's like Darth Maul walking into a conference room. You're not going to listen to his ideas. You're just going to be terrified of him. Whereas even Vader, even if we see on the Death Star, Vader can walk in and like he at least fits in enough to be hanging out in the conference room and talking with people. Whereas if Maul talks, you're like, oh, I'm sorry. Sure. Whatever you said, that sort of thing. I like the fact you touch on the fact that, Windu, one of the reasons I love Windu so much as a character is he is the embodiment of the person who needs the rules and the discipline to keep him from being who he would be without them. It's sort of like the guy who joins the military, and if he doesn't join the military, he's going to wind up being in prison for murder after one bad night at a bar sort of thing. So you want rules around that person.
Right.
So if anything, Windu is sort of almost like a walking advertisement for keeping the rules of the Jedi Order. Because, heaven help the galaxy if Windu doesn't have those strictures put around him. Because he will lay waste to planets if he goes outside of those rules. He needs those clear, bold lines drawn for him. And he's an intelligent enough guy where it's going to be, he's going to ask those nitpicky questions so that the Jedi are like, really, we have to write a rule for that too? Yeah, well, if we don't do that, Windu's going to just be like, you didn't write a rule about that. It's like, all right, fine, we'll write a rule about that. And then all the other Jedi are like, why do we need a rule for this? And it's because of people like Windu. So, then conversely, we could go on and have like a whole psychoanalysis of Mace Windu. We all know I adore the character. Sorry for going off on the tangent like that. But I think that Dooku still winds up no matter what. I just think the guy cannot resist. And again, going back to the Tales of the Jedi story, that beautiful story of him with young Qui-Gon, where it looks and feels like an old Hammer horror film. And Qui-Gon is the one who stops Dooku from fully committing to what he wants to do in those moments. And it's maybe Dooku's heart isn't as pure as it should be. Like Dooku, what I think is interesting is I would love to find out in the context of this discussion, what type of retreat process did they have for Jedi? did they have set up a process by which a Jedi could take a sabbatical for a certain amount of time so that the pressures of being in the galaxy could be released and they could just commune with the Force, go live somewhere in touch with the true Force, the living Force, be away from the galaxy and everything? Because I think that might be something worth exploring in some sort of thing where we find out that they did have that, but then as problems kept cropping up in the galaxy, they had less and less time to do it. And that's what led to so many Jedi breaking as they went. You know, all that to say, Dooku and Sifo Dyas on the council at the same time. I would, you know what? I'll throw this out there to you. I think it's possible that if Dooku is on the Jedi Council, Qui-Gon never gets sent back to Naboo. Because the first trip to Naboo, which leads to them bringing Anakin Skywalker back, I'll throw out there, I want to find out if you would agree with this. It's sort of like a final question for this discussion. Two questions. One, does Dooku go differently than Windu in terms of the opinion about Anakin? But two, does Dooku become a dissenting voice about sending Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon back to Naboo? Or is he the one with the wisdom to say, no, we can't get involved with this. I'm sorry that the Queen's going through this, but no, this is the wrong play.
It's interesting you ask that question, especially in light of this episode of Tales of the Jedi, because I think that the answer is that Dooku is actually all for this, because I think Dooku wants to be more interventionist, because he wants to be able to impose his will, right? You know, he wants to impose what he views as being right. And so therefore, I could absolutely see him actually being the one who's like, I'll go, you know, I'll handle this matter, because of the way in which he views that the idea of the Jedi basically is to enforce these type of things. So, well,
going the first time, yes, but does his affection for Qui-Gon keep him from sending them back, is what I'm saying. Right? Like,
yeah.
because he's in a position to protect Qui-Gon at that point. And does his affection for Qui-Gon, but even to your point, if he says, you know what, I'll go instead of Qui-Gon, I think that's an interesting thing to suppose there to begin with.
Yeah, I think what I see happening is that in both instances, you know, Qui-Gon would want to be there, and that he would want to be the one that's involved. And, you know, especially, again, like that episode, you know, I totally see him thinking to himself and even disobeying the council, you know, even though he's on it, but disobeying the council and being the one who goes. If they were the ones to decide, hey, we don't want to get involved, but Dooku's like, I'm going with the Queen, just because of his, you know.
I would say that if Dooku went with the Queen and wins, that winds up what gets him kicked off the council. Because he's, if he does what you're saying, where it's like, oh, fine, I'll go take care of it, and he goes and he kills it, and it's like, well, okay, you're not behaving like a council member at all. You got to chill out, bro, and think about this. But you know, let's get to the thing I'm dying to think. Does he vote for Anakin to train?
That's a tricky one, because I think that Dooku has enough of a disregard for the rules to be like, yeah, let's do it. But at the same time, I could also see him being the person of being like, yeah, we don't need a savior, you know? Well, or being somebody who doesn't put their hope in prophecies, right? So
let me flip it on its head. What if he votes for Anakin to be trained, but instead of Qui-Gon saying, I'll take him as my Padawan learner, Dooku says, I'll do this. And Dooku takes Anakin on as he says, I'll step down from the council and train him. That becomes the wedge by which Palpatine winds up exerting more influence. So, I mean, you know, this is all what if stuff, obviously.
I think I appreciate where you're going with that, though, because I do think that it kind of shows in many ways where we can keep coming down to ways in which Dooku would find himself being kicked off the council, right? For being disobedient in more ways than Qui-Gon could. And, I think the interesting thing about this whole question really becomes to me is just, there is a spirit in Qui-Gon that he got from his master that gives him a disregard for the rules in a way that is a little bit reckless, right? And I think the problem, though, is that it's the pendulum swing from where the council is, And so somewhere in the middle is where you needed to be, which is kind of the middle is where you get like a Yoda and an Obi-Wan a little bit further down the road, right? Where they're able to kind of take, I think, the best of both of those massive swings and kind of meet somewhere in the middle. And that's where the Jedi should have been the whole time. But it's too little too late, and Qui-Gon and I think even Dooku maybe are, reactions to this place of where the council has come and where the Jedi, not just the Jedi, but the Republic have come. And so they're swinging so wildly in the other direction that it's what gets us into trouble, which, I think as we look at that, that's a perfect representation of how our world works, right? The danger of the way our world kind of like wildly swings from one side to the next. And it's like, like neither extreme is really right here. It's usually when we meet somewhere in the middle between the two, which is temperance, which is usually where wisdom comes in, that things are better. And so I like that we kind of got to that place here at the end, because I think the question that you asked at the very beginning, we've been able to kind of come to this place where it's like, most likely Dooku, even if he had been on the council, would have found a way to get himself kicked off. The same way that, Qui-Gon never gets invited to the council, just like Dooku never did, And so I think it's just a really fascinating thing. And, in the end, Qui-Gon himself is not wrong, but the way he goes about things is wrong.
And I think this will never be the title of the episode, but I think this discussion, to speak to your point that you just hit on, I think the perfect title for this episode would simply be Dooku's a d-. But that being said, Master Rushing, if anybody wants to debate the finer points of this conversation with you, where can they find you online?
All over social media. I'm under the name Matt Rushing02. Of course, here in the network, you can find me in a completed show called Owl Post, all about the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. I'm on the TFM network with a bunch of shows. You'll find me in the 602 Club, where we talk all about fandoms we love. Not just one fandom, but as many as we can cram in. John's a frequent guest over there. You can also find me doing Literary Treks, The Orb, Warp 5, The Artificial Tango, and Saddle Up over there. But John, when you're not trying to find the best place in Coruscant to get some fish dogs, where can people find you?
You can find me prowling about Wild Space. And you can find me right here on the network co-hosting a show called House Lights, where we look at the work of directors through all sorts of zany combinations. I co-host that with Tristan Riddell and Darren Moser, and we have a grand old time there. But I'll tell you what, Master Rushing, I think it's time that we have a blind taste test where, fine, I'll concede that Gungan fish dogs win, but let's go ahead. Let's have a blind taste test with the true delicacy, which would be Coruscant chicken patties. So let's go ahead and close these negotiations.
These negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.